soon after, not right away, but soon after, they would begin to compile these books. In fact, the very first compilation of Scripture, the New Testament, that we know of was the Pauline corpus. That's the 13 letters of Paul were bound together as one book and sent out among the churches. The Gospels and Acts, bound together as one book, sent out among the churches. And it wasn't until much later that they would all come together. We have early fragments called the Moratorian fragment that shows an early listing of these books. It shows the same Gospels, the same list of the epistles. But the point of the matter is, the two things that happened early on to confirm that this is being recognized in Scripture is that the apostles' confirmation, apostolic confirmation, and the church recognized it. Yes, ma'am.
So the books weren't written while Christ was alive.
No, not
they
the New
were
Testament.
Written after he died, and
now you're talking about New Testament only.
The New Testament.
Old Testament, of course, was written before Christ.
So the people, I guess, were waiting to see what happened to Christ as far as becoming king on earth, and they waited till the miracles and stuff to
well,
rise.
you could make the statement that when Christ was on earth, he didn't write anything specifically. Christ didn't write anything. Thus, neither did his apostles at that time. But once he died, because his mission wasn't completed, until he sat down at the right hand of the Father on high, which I'll be preaching about in 2 weeks, his mission wasn't completed. So the Scripture that would explain what his mission was from beginning to ending was not written until after his mission was done.
So that's when the seal was opened.
Okay, now you're in a different place.
I mean, no, as far as what I'm asking, does that mean that's when Christ opened his purpose and let it be known? It was no longer a secret after his death?
No, I don't think. When you're talking about seals, you're not talking about the 7 seals of Revelation, are you?
Sort of.
Okay, because that's an
That's
end time. That's an
something
end time.
else,
That's
okay.
a forward revelation thing. Depending on how you understand Revelation, that is something that's yet to happen. The 7 seals being opened and the judgments falling based upon the 7 seals. That's in the future. What we have to understand is that God, for instance, all that happened with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But it wasn't written down until Moses.
Right.
Because it wasn't completed. It wasn't finished.
And the same way with this.
Yes. All that happened with Jesus wasn't written down until after it was all completed. To show how it fit. So that there's not a piecemeal putting together, but you can have the whole thing. This is the whole account of the gospel of Christ. This is the beginnings of the gospel of Christ. This is the early part of Mark, the first chapter. Okay?
Gotcha.
Seems like it would have been a whole lot easier to write it during the period of time that Christ was alive, simply to answer questions that were in wonderment.
Well, I think though Christ's ministry when he was here though was not to write Scripture. Christ's ministry was to come and to teach and to live and to die and to resurrect. We have to understand the purpose of the ministry while he was here. It takes time to sit down and to write, and Christ's apostles were always on the move. I mean, I'm not saying that's exactly the reason why, but I'm saying there was a time and a place for writing. God knew what that time and place would be, and it would be after Christ had gone to heaven. So
We wouldn't have understood.
Well, I think that there's a lot that could be left to just say there's a lot that we don't know why, but we do know what, and what he did had purpose. He purposed that after it was completed, he would have it written down. But here's the important thing that we need to understand. The prophets of God led the initial confirmation. The people of God later came to an official recognition. Thus we can say God determined what the canon is by having it written. The people of God discovered what the canon is by having been led by God's men and by an overall understanding of the Word. What is important to note is that there was never a time, and this is so important, there was never a time when councils and committees came together and voted on Scripture. I know if you watch the Discovery Channel, they'll talk about Constantine and 325. Constantine burned books and he took other ones, and that's what the Council of Nicaea was about. That's not true. You look like you will.
Okay, repeat that.
No, I'm just thinking about going back to the question about the time period. That of course as far as the New Testament is the the authenticity of the new covenant for the people of God with the church. See, and of course it couldn't have been written then because it was after the whole day of Pentecost when Christ came back, and
that's a good point.
Which started the church, and then of course then Paul was a specific one to take it to all the Gentile nations. Okay, and that took place over a whole bunch of years, and of course when you look at Acts, which is a history of the church, So so that really,
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that right. And so I mean, I thought about it. Pentecost is the birthday of the church. The New Testament is what is the covenant with the church, and the writings came after the birthday of the church, and after the church had already begun to flourish throughout the world. So, good point.
And it's good to remember that the book of Acts is basically is a history of the whole formation of the New Testament church up until.
Yeah. Good point. And Acts and again, Luke and Acts was probably wrote concurrently, wrote back to back. Another good point. But getting to the issue of councils voting on Scripture, this puts the power in the hands of the church to determine what is and what is not Scripture. But there is a fatal flaw in that logic. Many years before there was ever a church council, there was Scripture. And how did how did the people of God know it was Scripture? How did a Jew in 150 BC know that Hosea was Scripture? Well, that's an important question, because the Roman Catholic Church will tell us that the Roman Catholic Church determined what was Scripture, because they were given the authority by God to determine Scripture. What have we already learned today? God determines, the church discovers, but not. You see how the language is important there? Because they say we determine what is Scripture. So the question to ask the Roman Catholic is 150 years before Christ, how did anyone know what was Scripture? Because the Roman Catholic Church did not exist. Yet God still expected His people to obey Scripture, and Christ still held people accountable to that Scripture. How could Christ hold anybody accountable if they didn't know what it was? Because they did know what it was. It had been confirmed by the prophets, and it had been received by God's people. I'm not going to spend a whole week. If I were doing an in-depth seminary level course, I would, but I'm not. So I'm going to finish by telling you one last thing. I could do a whole week, or even longer, I could do a whole semester probably, on the Old Testament canon. Okay? Because there is a question about the Old Testament canon. What about the books that the church calls the Deuterocanonicals, or more commonly called the Apocrypha? Why is it that the book that the Catholics use has 12 to 15, depending on how you number them, more books than the book we use? I mean, they have a whole 1st and 2nd Maccabees, 3rd Kings, the Tobit, was it Judith? Maybe it may not be one. Maybe another. Huh?
No,
Oh, I'm sorry.
sorry. I
They
just
have the Book of Miriam.
Not in the Apocrypha. That would be something else. That's an extra biblical